I'm Natalie, 27 years old, and I'm getting married in a few weeks. Right now, I'm sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of wedding invitations. My eyes scan the names, making sure I haven't forgotten anyone important. But there's one name I deliberately left off the list: my stepmother's. I know what you're thinking. How could I not invite my stepmother to my own wedding? Well, it's a long story, and I guess now's as good a time as any to tell it. It all started when I was 5 years old. My parents split up, and my whole world turned upside down. They told me I'd be living with both of them, switching back and forth. At the time, I thought it was great. I loved both my parents and couldn't choose between them. This way, I didn't have to. Life after the divorce wasn't so bad at first. When I was with my dad, we'd go on these amazing road trips. He owned his own business, so he could take time off whenever it was his turn to have me. We'd hop in his car and explore different cities. I remember feeling like a little explorer, discovering new places with my dad by my side. When I was with my mom, things were different but just as good. We'd spend hours playing with my dolls, making up stories for each one, and the smell of fresh-baked cookies often filled the house. Those were happy times. I felt loved, wanted, and cherished by both my parents. But then, things changed. My dad got remarried when I was 7. I remember the day he introduced me to Sarah, my soon-to-be stepmother. She was pretty, with long blonde hair and a smile that seemed to light up the room. At first, things were okay. Sarah was nice to me, and she seemed to genuinely care. She'd help me with my homework when I was at Dad's house and even taught me how to braid my hair. But as time went on, something shifted. Sarah wanted kids of her own, but she couldn't get pregnant. I didn't understand it at the time, but looking back now, I can see how it affected her. Sarah's attitude towards me did a complete 180. Where once she'd been kind and welcoming, now she seemed to resent my very existence. It was like she hated me for being born when she couldn't have children of her own. I didn't understand it then. I was just a kid, wondering what I'd done wrong to make my stepmother suddenly dislike me so much. As time went on, Sarah's attitude towards me only got worse. It was like she'd made a decision: if she couldn't have kids of her own, she'd live for herself. And in that life there was no room for me. I started noticing changes when I'd come back from my mom's. Dad and Sarah would be tanned and relaxed, full of stories about trips they'd taken while I was gone. One day, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Dad, why don't we go on trips like we used to?" He looked uncomfortable, glancing at Sarah before answering. "Well, sweetie, things are different now. We have to consider Sarah's schedule too." Sarah cut in, her voice sharp. "Natalie, you're old enough to understand that adults need their own time. Don't be selfish." I felt like I'd been slapped. Selfish? For wanting to spend time with my own father? But it wasn't just the trips. When I was at Dad's house, everything changed. Sarah had new rules for me, and they all seemed designed to keep me out of sight and out of mind. "Natalie," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "why don't you go play in your room? Adults are talking." At first, I tried to argue, "But I want to be out here with you and Dad." Sarah's eyes would narrow. "Your father and I need some peace and quiet. Is that too much to ask?" So I'd retreat to my room, feeling more like a prisoner than a daughter in my own father's house. The list of Don Ts grew longer by the day. Don't make noise. Don't talk loudly. Don't play active games. Don't laugh too loud. It was like living in a library, but worse. One afternoon, I was in the living room, laughing at a funny TV show. Sarah stormed in, face red with anger. "What did I tell you about being quiet?" she snapped. "But I was just laughing at." She cut me off. "I don't care what you were laughing at. In this house, you follow my rules. Understand?" I nodded, fighting back tears. "Yes, Sarah." "Good," she said, turning to leave. "Now go to your room and stay there until dinner." Dad seemed oblivious to it all. Or maybe he just didn't want to see it. Whenever I tried to talk to him about how Sarah was treating me, he'd brush it off. "She's just adjusting, Natalie," he'd say. "Give her time." But time didn't make things better. It only made Sarah more bold in her dislike of me. she'd criticize everything I did, from how I dressed to how I ate. Honestly, Natalie, can't you sit up straight and chew with your mouth closed? It's like you were raised in a barn. I wanted to scream, to tell her that I was just a kid, that I was trying my best, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. In Sarah's eyes, my very existence was an offense. So I learned to make myself small, to be quiet, to stay out of the way. I became a ghost in my father's house, tiptoeing around, afraid to make a sound or draw attention to myself. Every 2 weeks, when it was time to go back to Mom's, I felt like I could breathe again. But the dread of returning to Dad's house, to Sarah's cold stares and harsh words, always loomed over me. I managed to keep my emotions bottled up for years, but by the time I turned 12, I couldn't take it anymore. One day, after a particularly nasty encounter with Sarah, I broke down and told Mom everything. Mom listened, her face growing darker with each word. When I finished, she exploded. That thing, she yelled, making me jump. How dare she treat my daughter like this? Before I could stop her, Mom was on the phone with Dad. I've never heard her so angry. Listen here, you spineless excuse for a father, she snarled into the phone. If you don't get your wife under control, I swear I'll take you to court and make sure you never see Natalie again. I felt sick. This wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted things to get better, not worse. A few days later, when I went back to Dad's house, he sat me down for a serious talk. Natalie, he began, his voice stern. We need to discuss your behavior. Sarah has been nothing but good to you. She's trying her best to be a good stepmother, and all you do is complain. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But Dad, she... Enough, he snapped. Do you realize what you've done? Your mother is threatening to take away my visitation rights. Do you want that? Do you want to never see me again? Tears welled up in my eyes. No, of course not. Dad's voice softened a bit. Then you need to stop this, Natalie. No more complaints about Sarah. She only wants what's best for you. If you keep this up, you'll end up tearing this family apart. Is that what you want? I shook my head, unable to speak through my tears. As he left the room, I felt like my world had shattered. Not only had Dad not believed me, but he'd also made me feel like everything was my fault. I was the problem, not Sarah. From that day on, I stopped complaining. I decided to be the perfect stepdaughter, to do everything Sarah wanted, just so I wouldn't lose my dad. I became a shadow in the house, quiet and obedient. I had no say in anything, but at least I still got to see my father, even if he seemed more like a stranger with each passing day. Life at Mom's house was a different story. A few years after the divorce from Dad, Mom met Robert. He was kind, funny, and had a daughter of his own, Lily, who was a year younger than me. Over time, I fell in love with both of them. Robert never tried to replace my dad, but he was always there for me. He'd help me with my homework, listen to my problems, and even taught me how to ride a bike, something Dad had always been too busy to do. Lily became the sister I never knew I wanted. We'd stay up late, giggling and sharing secrets. She never made me feel like an outsider. As I got older, the contrast between my two homes became starker. At Dad's, I was a ghost, trying not to upset the delicate balance. At Mom's, I was Natalie, loud, funny, and loved. As I entered my teenage years, my needs naturally grew. Like any kid my age, I wanted the latest gadgets, a cool smartphone, a decent laptop for schoolwork. Dad, to his credit, seemed to understand this. He'd always been generous, and at first he didn't hesitate to buy me what I needed. I remember the day he handed me my first smartphone. But my joy was short-lived. Sarah's disapproving frown said it all. Later that night, I overheard them arguing. You're spoiling her, Tom, Sarah hissed. Do you have any idea how much that phone cost? She needs it for school, Dad defended weakly. Sarah scoffed. Please. She needs it to post selfies and waste time on social media. You're throwing money away. From that day on, Sarah appointed herself as the family's financial guardian. She told Dad she'd help him save money when it came to my expenses. What this really meant was that she'd take control of everything I got. The next time I needed new clothes, Sarah insisted on handling it herself. What followed was a parade of secondhand clothes and shoes, all bought from discount websites or clearance sales. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against secondhand stuff, but Sarah took it to an extreme. More often than not, the clothes were ill-fitting, out of style, or just plain uncomfortable. But I didn't dare complain. I still remembered Dad's warning about tearing the family apart. The irony of it all, while I was forced to wear hand-me-downs, Sarah never skimped on herself. Her closet was a fashion magazine come-to-life, designer shoes, branded bags, clothes from the latest collections. She'd spend hours preening in front of the mirror, adjusting her perfectly coordinated outfits. Things came to a head when I graduated high school. Dad had promised me a car, nothing fancy, just something to get me around. I was over the moon. Finally, a sign that he still cared, that he saw me as more than just an inconvenience in his new life. But Sarah, true to form, couldn't let it happen. The night before we were supposed to go car shopping, all hell broke loose. A car, Sarah shrieked. "Are you out of your mind, Tom? We can't afford it. Besides, I need a new car. Mine is almost 3 years old." I listened from my room, heart sinking with every word. I knew how this would end. Sure enough, the next morning, Dad came to me with that look on his face, the one that said he was about to disappoint me again. "Natalie, honey," he began, not meeting my eyes. "About the car." I saved him the trouble. "It's okay, Dad. I understand. We can't afford it, right?" He looked relieved that he didn't have to say it himself.
Right.
"But hey, I promise I'll pay for any college you want to go to, and your accommodation too. How's that sound?" I forced a smile. "Sounds great, Dad. Thanks." As he left my room, I heard Sarah's voice from downstairs. "Tom, dear, when are we going to look at that new Jeep I wanted?" So I sat there, in my room full of ill-fitting clothes, clutching my outdated phone, dreaming of a car I'd never get. And I realized something: the material things weren't what hurt the most. It was what they represented. Every second-hand shirt, every denied request, every broken promise was just another way of saying, "You're not worth it, Natalie." When it came time to choose a college, I poured my heart into researching the best options. I finally found one that seemed perfect: great program, beautiful campus, and not too far from home. I was ecstatic when I got accepted. But as soon as Sarah saw the tuition fees, all hell broke loose. "Are you kidding me?" she screeched, face turning red. "This is highway robbery." Dad tried to calm her down. "Now, Sarah, we did promise Natalie." "I don't care what we promised," Sarah interrupted, practically foaming at the mouth. "We are not paying this much for her to party for 4 years. She stormed off and returned with a handful of brochures. Here she thrust them at Dad. "These colleges are much more reasonable, and they're farther away. It'll teach her some independence." And just like that, my dreams were crushed again. I ended up at Sarah's choice of college, cheaper, yes, but also far from everything and everyone I knew. Mom and Robert were thrilled when they heard I was going to college. They didn't know about the behind-the-scenes drama, and I didn't have the heart to tell them. Why burden them with my problems? Despite everything, I threw myself into my studies. I was determined to make the most of this opportunity, even if it wasn't exactly what I'd hoped for. I'd come home for holidays, splitting my time between Mom's welcoming house and Dad's. Well, Dad's house. It was during one of these breaks that everything finally came to a head. Sarah was having a birthday party, and to my surprise, Dad called and asked me to come. "Sarah would love to see you," he said, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I was skeptical, but a small part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, things were changing. So I agreed. I even bought Sarah a gift, a nice scarf I'd saved up for from my part-time job at college. When I arrived at the house, the party was in full swing. I took a deep breath and approached Sarah, gift in hand. "Happy birthday, Sarah," I said, forcing a smile. "I hope you like." I never got to finish. Sarah's face contorted with rage. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I stammered, confused. "But Dad said you wanted me to come." "Get out," she shrieked. "You're not welcome here. How dare you show up and ruin my party?" I stood there, frozen in shock. The room had gone silent, all eyes on us. Sarah snatched the gift from my hands and, without even looking at it, tossed it in a nearby trash can. "I don't want anything from you. You're not worthy to be here among my friends. Leave. Now." Tears stung my eyes as I turned and fled. I ran up to my old room, grabbing the few belongings I'd left there over the years. As I reached for the front door, I heard Sarah's laughter floating from the living room, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just publicly humiliated her stepdaughter and thrown away a heartfelt gift. I slammed the door behind me and walked away from that house for what I promised myself would be the last time. I went straight to Mom's, where I broke down and finally told her everything, all the years of mistreatment, the manipulation, the broken promises. Mom was furious, but more than that, she was heartbroken for me. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, holding me close. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry you went through all that alone." As I cried in my mother's arms, I felt a weird mix of sadness and relief. Sad for the relationship with my father that I'd probably never have, but relieved to finally be free from Sarah's toxic presence. The day after Sarah's birthday disaster, my phone rang. It was Dad. I almost didn't answer, but a part of me still hoped he'd apologize, that he'd finally see the truth. "Natalie," he said, his voice stern, "why did you leave Sarah's party so abruptly? She was quite upset." My blood boiled. "That's not what happened." She yelled at me in front of everyone and threw my gift in the trash. She kicked me out. There was a pause, then Dad's voice came back, cold and angry. "I can't believe you'd make up such lies about Sarah. Why are you trying to denigrate my wife? Call me when you're ready to apologize to Sarah." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, tears streaming down my face. That was the moment I realized I'd truly lost my father. The next few years were a blur. I threw myself into my studies, graduated college with honors, and landed a decent job. I saw Dad a handful of times, always on neutral ground, a cafe, a park, never at his house. About a year after graduation, I met Jason at work. He was a few years older, kind, funny, and most importantly, he really saw me, not as an inconvenience or a burden, but as a person worthy of love and respect. 4 years flew by. Jason and I moved in together, adopted a cat named Muffin, and built a life filled with love and laughter. Then, on a random Tuesday evening as we were doing dishes after dinner, Jason turned to me and proposed. And just like that, I was engaged. As the initial excitement settled, the reality of wedding planning set in. Which brings us back to where this story began, me, surrounded by wedding invitations, grappling with the question of whether to invite Sarah. In the end, I decided to send an invitation to Dad alone. I couldn't bring myself to include Sarah, not after everything that had happened. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a mix of sadness and resolve. I was starting a new chapter in my life, and I wanted it to be free from the shadows of the past. A week after I sent out the invitations, my phone rang. It was Dad. I answered, expecting the usual awkward small talk. Instead, I got an earful of fury. "How dare you," he bellowed, not even bothering with a hello. "How could you disrespect Sarah like this? You invited me to your wedding but not her, after everything she's done for you." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A short, bitter laugh that seemed to shock Dad into silence. "Everything she's done for me," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Dad, are you hearing yourself right now?" "She raised you for years," he shot back. "She put so much love and care into." "Love and care," I interrupted, my calm finally snapping. "When, Dad? When did she ever show me love or care? Was it when she made me wear second-hand clothes while she bought designer outfits? Or when she convinced you not to buy me a car for college? Oh, I know it must have been when she threw my birthday gift in the trash and kicked me out of her party." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a quieter voice, Dad said, "Natalie, I'm sure you're exaggerating. Sarah wouldn't." "Wouldn't what, Dad? Wouldn't treat me like crap for years? Wouldn't make me feel unwelcome in my own home? Wouldn't consistently prioritize her own wants over my needs? Because she did all of that and you let her." My voice was shaking now, years of pent-up hurt and anger pouring out. "You never stood up for me, Dad, not once, You always took her side, always believed her over me. Do you have any idea how that felt? To know that your own father would always choose his wife over you." The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller somehow. "Natalie, I had no idea. I never meant to. Oh God, what have I done?" I heard a choked sob from his end, and despite everything, my heart clenched. "I'm so sorry, Pumpkin," he continued, his voice thick with tears. "I've been a terrible father. I put Sarah first, I ignored your feelings, I failed you. Can you ever forgive me?" I felt my own eyes welling up. This was all I'd wanted to hear for years, but now that the moment was here, I didn't know how to react. I hesitated, torn between hope and caution. "I'll think about it, Dad. That's all I can promise right now." We ended the call soon after, both emotionally drained. Over the next few weeks, Dad made a real effort. He called regularly, asked about the wedding plans, even offered to help with the costs. Slowly, cautiously, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Then, the day before the wedding, my phone rang again. It was Dad, and my stomach dropped at the sound of his voice. "Natalie," his voice hard. "It's Sarah, she had a heart attack. This is your fault. If you hadn't excluded her, if you hadn't stressed her out like this, I can't believe you'd do this to her. I won't be at your celebration. I hope you're happy." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. All the progress, all the hope I'd allowed myself to feel gone in an instant. As I cried in my fiancé's arms, I couldn't help but think, was this really it? Was this how my relationship with my father would end? On the eve of what should be the happiest day of my life. The morning I woke up with a mix of emotions, excitement for the day ahead, but also a lingering sadness about Dad's absence. As I sipped my coffee, trying to focus on the positive, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Sarah's social media page. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on it. What I saw made my blood boil. There was Sarah, looking perfectly healthy, posting dramatic status updates about how hurt she was, how ungrateful I was, how she was recovering from a terrible shock. But in her photos, she was smiling, looking as put together as ever. As I scrolled through the posts, my phone rang. It was Carol, one of Sarah's old friends from the neighborhood. "Natalie, it's Carol. Look, I shouldn't be calling you, but you need to know something. Sarah. She faked the heart attack. I overheard her bragging about it to some friends. She did it to make sure your dad wouldn't come to your wedding. I'm so sorry, honey." I thanked Carol and hung up, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to call Dad immediately to expose Sarah's lies, but then I stopped. What would be the point? He'd made his choice, time and time again. He'd chosen Sarah over me, believed her lies, let her mistreat me for years. This was just the final nail in the coffin. As I got ready for the wedding, surrounded by my mom, my stepsister Lily, and my bridesmaids, I pushed thoughts of Dad and Sarah out of my mind. This was my day, and I refused to let them ruin it. But there was still one problem. "Who's going to walk me down the aisle?" I asked, my voice small. Mom and Lily exchanged glances. Then Mom spoke up, "Honey, Robert would be honored to do it, if you'd like. He loves you like his own daughter, you know." I felt a lump in my throat. Robert, my stepdad, who'd been more of a father to me in many ways than my own dad. Who'd always supported me, always made me feel welcome and loved. "Really?" I asked, looking at Robert. He smiled warmly. "Nothing would make me prouder, Natalie, but only if that's what you want." In that moment I realized something important. Family isn't just about blood, it's about love, support, and being there for each other. Robert had been that for me, consistently for years. "I'd love that, Robert." "Thank you," I said, giving him a hug. The wedding was beautiful. As Robert walked me down the aisle, I saw Jason waiting for me, his face lit up with love. I saw my mom, Lily, and all our friends and family smiling and crying happy tears. In that moment, I knew I had all the family I needed right here. A few days after the wedding, as Jason and I were preparing to leave for our honeymoon, I decided to post some wedding photos online. Almost immediately, a nasty comment appeared under one of the pictures. "Look at that," Sarah's comment read. being walked down the aisle by a stranger while her own father wasn't even invited. Shameful. I stared at the comment, a familiar anger bubbling up inside me. But then I felt Jason's hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Nat?" he asked, concern in his eyes. I looked at my husband, then back at the phone. Suddenly, Sarah's words seemed small, petty, and utterly unimportant. "You know what? I am okay," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "In fact, I'm better than okay." Without another thought, I blocked Sarah's account. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I blocked Dad's too. It was time to close that chapter of my life for good.